Hi, this is Marshall, and my grandson Sebastian has suggested that perhaps I could record a little bit about the beginning history of paperback booksmith. Today is July 6th. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was living in New York City, moved there in 1957, 3 years after I came out of the Army, uh, stationed in Europe. I, I went to work for a small Wall Street brokerage firm. They would they had a small research department and then take the recommendations from the research department and pass them on to their customers. I was the junior member of a five-member research department. Uh, After 2 years, in 1959, Judy Smith, who I had met uh, shortly less than 2 years before, and I moved to New York, got married, moved to New York City on, I believe, if my memory is correct, 314 West 102nd Street. In 1960, for two reasons, I decided that although I enjoyed doing the research on the industries that I was working on, I decided that this was not my long-term goal as employment. Uh, the two reasons were that what I was primarily doing was taking money and helping people to take their money and making more money. And that to me didn't sound like a productive venture, or at least not in my own terms. The second reason was that I had recommended a stock to the firm and especially to my friends, all of whom put in substantial money, and decided that although I had recommended it, I at that time just felt that it was time to sell. And I called our order department to place the order and got a call from a partner at the firm. The firm, by the way, was Burnham and Company, uh, saying that he had some clients that would be interested in buying the stock. So if I would hold off, maybe he could purchase all the stock that I was trying to sell. I found out 2 hours later that he wasn't buying stock. He was selling all of his stock and getting out first before I could. And that was not the kind of an atmosphere that I felt like working in. I started to look around for what would I do if I left Wall Street and where would I go? How would I do it? One thing that helped me move more quickly was that I purchased stock in a company called American Motors. The president of the company, it was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and the president of the company was George Romney, father of the presidential candidate Mitt Romney. George Romney had been governor, I think it was of Illinois, um, and then went into industry. I went to the annual meeting of their salesmen, and the vibrancy of the company, of the group, of the people, was just electrifying. They had decided, or Romney had decided, that the American car company was losing business to the German car companies, especially Volkswagen, and the Japanese car companies, especially Toyota, who were selling smaller cars with higher mileage per gallon usage. The cost of oil was starting to go up, and people became much more interested in higher or lower cost for miles driven. I decided to invest in American Motors, and if you'll forgive the expression, go for broke. I put it all in, and it worked. In a fairly short period of time, I was able to make $30,000 to $35,000, which I believe is about $200,000 in 2019 after inflation. Now it was choosing where to invest that money, and I looked around at in New York, drove around, read, and came to a small drugstore in Greenwich Village, New York, called Sheridan Square Drugstore. It had, in the previous 2 or 3 years, put in a wall of paperback books, primarily Penguin books, and which became quickly one of its major sales components. And within a year had pretty much turned the store from a drugstore pharmacy into a paperback bookstore. And I immediately said, that's my world. I'm not an academic, I'm a businessman, but I'm interested in literature, in learning, and primarily in education. I did some research. I tried to get a job where I would work for free at Sheridan Square and other bookstores. No one would do it, so I decided to go ahead. Fairly quickly, I found a retail store in downtown Boston, and I got a copy of what was called then paper-bound books in print. The manual had 3,000 titles in paperback. Today, my estimate is that there are probably 300,000 titles in print. But we were at the beginning, what was called by Publishers Weekly, of the paperback revolution. The advantage of paperbacks was that they were low cost. You could have mysteries and science fiction. You could have philosophy and drama. It was a full-scale collection of titles. Judy and I sat down with the catalog of paperback titles, trying to pick out the 1,000 or so titles that we thought we would need for a new bookstore. Looking back on that, where I got the hubris to feel that I could put together an entire bookstore without knowing anything about either the retailing world, well, I knew something about retailing, but about the publishing world, about the book retailing world, it just shocks me. But we did it. The store was at 17 Arlington Street in Boston, across from the Public Gardens. It probably was one of the worst locations in the Boston area for a stop-in, drop-in bookstore. It was inside. You had to go through a door, through a hallway, and into the bookstore. We got a lot of publicity, which was very helpful, and had very modest sales. I think we opened in March of 1961. Um, what we didn't know was that in June and July, I think it was for 2 months, there was a great fair on the fair uh, in the public gardens, and half of Boston came to it. Uh, we put signs in the window, and our sales doubled during that time. People found the store and realized that here was something that was different for the Boston area. It was a collection of reasonably priced books with a high literary quality. One problem that we had was that the literary quality was too high. I decided that we would not carry mysteries and science fiction. That was pop literature and didn't belong in the store. Until one day, Ian Ballantyne of Ballantyne Books came into the store, and I told him what my decision was. He was trying to sell me part of his science fiction collection. He said, well, did you know that half the professors at MIT, who are the great scientists in the world, read science fiction? Most of the world reads mysteries. You can't have a bookstore if you don't have both mysteries and science fiction. At which point I laid down the law that we would not censor anything. We would choose the ones that we wanted to have in the store, but not keep anything out for personal reasons. The store, again, as I said, was modestly successful, and we decided to open a second store in Coolidge Corner. I forget the address. It was in the 270s, a small store next to Dorothy Muriel's on Harvard Street in Coolidge Corner. In the meantime, Judy had had our first child, Lonnie. She had been our cashier for the store on Arlington Street. And we were now looking for a home in Brookline to raise our family. The Brookline store opened in November 1961. A few weeks later, a young woman came into the store looking for a part-time job for 2 weeks until she moved to Florida, where she was going to settle down. At the end of the 2 weeks, she decided to stay and became a full-time employee. Her name was Evelyn Vigo. Evelyn stayed with the company for the next 56 years. She retired just 5 years ago. She was a mainstay in the company and right next to me as we opened other stores over time. Our third store opened on Brattle Street near the center of Harvard Square in Cambridge. That store was an immediate success. Putting the three together, and we had a thriving small company. We were among the first paperback bookstores in the country, and certainly in the Boston area. One of my favorite stories about the Cambridge store was some years later when Kurt Vonnegut wrote a book called Slaughterhouse-Five. It was his first book appealing to a broad public. He was, up until then, was considered a science fiction writer with a large following on college campuses. Slaughterhouse-Five was a tremendous success. It was a great book. So it goes. Vonnegut made it known that he did not sign books in bookstores. I wrote a letter to Kurt Vonnegut saying that I had an idea for a signing that might interest him, and that was to have a signing date in Harvard Square at the bookstore at midnight on a Friday night. And he wrote back saying he thought that was a wonderful idea. And I'm not really sure exactly when it was, but he came to Brookline, had dinner with us at the house, went to the bookstore, and we stopped traffic 3 miles around Harvard Square. It was a mob scene. He was terrific. He was friendly, he was open, he signed, he talked with the students as they went in and out of the bookstore. We had a wonderful time. Over the next 2 or 3 years, we opened 3 more stores, and we're looking for a 6th store. I realized at reading the literature in the retail world that the coming trend in retailing was in closed shopping malls, heated and air-conditioned, clean, large, anchored by 2 major department stores with anywhere from 10 to 100 stores in between. And we opened our first shopping mall store in the Natick Mall. And again, it was an instant success. It was a very small store. It was 1,100 square feet. By the way, our original stores were about 2,000 feet. 1,100 feet was small, but it became our highest volume store. That opened the door to shopping malls, not just in the Boston area, but in a growing area in nearby states. The difficulty was that to open stores at any pace required a large investment in capital, which I didn't have and did not have access to. Our lawyer, Fran Meany, said that the growing part of the retail world was in franchising retail stores, trying to develop a brand name. And Paperback Booksmith had a reputation in the industry so that we were able to open not in the major malls because we were a small company, but many of the mid and smaller malls around New England and down into New Jersey.